Anastasia. Yes, this knowledge is really interesting and important, and it gives a completely different understanding of not only the visible but also of the invisible world. Rigdon. Absolutely. But, perhaps, let us get back to our conversation about the human structure in the invisible world. Human, like other information objects of the material world, from giant stars to the smallest particles, has certain projections, kind of as mirror reflections at the energy level. Different peoples at different times have denoted them differently, describing or recording the invisible structure of man in the chronicles of secret knowledge, sacred texts, and pictures. Let us conditionally call these live projections essences, as they are quite sentient, even more so than people suppose, and have their own characteristics. By their nature, these essences represent energy structures, certain local centers. In the invisible structure of human, these are the same inseparable parts of him, like the head, arms, and so on are in the physical body. In the center of the structure, in the middle of all the projections of a person, is the soul. The essences are energy and informational structures, and they play an important role both in the life of man and in his after-death destiny. They have great capabilities and are connected with other dimensions where interaction takes place on a subtle energy level. Thanks to them, a person can influence the world from the perspective of higher dimensions of the material world, up to the sixth dimension. Man's essences are named according to their location around the structure as well as the conditional orientation relative to his physical body, the front, the back, the right, and the left essences. They represent the main fields, so to speak, the living sides of a four-sided truncated pyramid in the overall human structure. They are approximately located at an arm's length from the physical body of a person in the directions corresponding to their names, in the front, in the back, and at the sides, on the right and on the left side. The knowledge about them has been considered sacred since ancient times. There exist many various references to them in the mythology of peoples of the world, from antiquity to the present day. For example, this information can be found in cosmological myths and legends of the peoples of the world, in rituals of sorcerers, shamans, priests, and exorcists. In particular, the descriptions of the latter often say that a person addresses the four elements or directions of the world, the four spirit aids of man, and so on while performing a certain traditional ritual. In many cases, the connecting link is the center. In the sacred legends, this is the soul as the center of man's energy structure, the fifth center. In other cases, it is referred to as the first center. In practical rituals, it is the personality's consciousness. So, the external actions of such a spellcaster are, as a rule, either a theatrical play designed for the public, imitation of the lost knowledge without understanding the essence, or a mere concealment of it. In reality, the main action takes place in a person, in his inner world. With help of certain knowledge and practices, he simply gathers himself into a single whole and operates these essences. The personality is the control center. Thanks to such joining, the person's capabilities in the invisible world greatly expand. I draw your attention to the fact that these essences are not the astral doubles of man. Each of the four essences represents, let us say, a certain energy field. Figuratively speaking, this is a transparent cluster which can turn into any thought form that a person sets, a mirror image of the person himself or some image of an animal, spirit, and so on. We can say that a person, while doing certain meditation techniques in an altered state of consciousness, assigns to one of the essences a certain thought form and, focusing his attention on it, materializes that essence. Anastasia. So, in essence, it is a transition from the state of an energy wave into a material particle. As soon as the observer focuses on the essence, the process of transformation of energy into subtle matter takes place. Accordingly, it acquires a thought form, the image put into it by the person. Rigdon. Yes, at that, its connection with the invisible world is fully preserved. As I have already said, each of the four essences has its own characteristics and manifests a certain connection between the visible and the invisible world. The front essence is located in front, at an arm's length from the physical body of a person. It is connected to the person's life here and now, both in the third and in higher dimensions, and with his movement from the present to the future. This is a kind of a vector and an indicator of the life's way. If a person chooses the spiritual, then this path has one vector and a focused direction of striving forward to a higher and the final result, merging the personality with the soul, that is, to spiritual liberation. This essence is responsible for the person's self-development, for spiritual movement. It carries a peculiar emotional color, that of faith, spiritual love, and hope for the future. If a person's intentions on the spiritual path are stable, then it also serves for him as a very good protection against the external invisible influence of others or alien aggressive essences. Its activation can be seen by the state of the person himself, when he feels inspired and when a surge of positive emotions and the deepest spiritual intentions can be observed in him. In legends of the peoples of the world, the front essence was often designated as a unicorn as well as the element, spirit, of the sky, air. It was depicted in the form of a free bird, a falcon or the mythical thunderbird, the phoenix. In many cultures, the bird served as the symbol of the soul, the divine essence, the spirit of life, the spirit of the sky, freedom, ascent, inspiration, prediction, prophecy, and a connection between space zones. Anastasia, indeed. In fact, birds were depicted already in the Upper Paleolithic era, and sometimes with emphasis on the sacred character of these designations. In the Neolithic age, they were also painted along with the solar, sun, signs which were placed above the birds. Rigden, quite true, which points to the special significance of these paintings, if, of course, the person possesses knowledge about secret signs. So, getting back to the front essence. The knowledge about the operation of the four essences greatly expands human capabilities. Frequent losses of sleepers happen due to lack of basic knowledge in these matters. For example, the majority of sleepers act through their front essence without even realizing it, and thus make a big mistake which leads to poor performance in their work, waste of time, and high energy consumption which often results in the rapid lethal outcome for the operator. More experienced sleepers act through their left essence. But more about it a bit later. Anastasia, sleepers are largely unknown to society. This is a secret special forces unit in the national security structures of civilized countries. It is quite surprising that the policy of materialization of consciousness of the population takes place everywhere in the global community and that the very seditious thought of creating a science to study the human energy body, the existence of which has already been known for a very long time, is ridiculed. In this context, an increase in the development of such special forces takes place in almost all civilized states which compete with one another. After all, their specialists are able to extract information without leaving the room, influence certain individuals at the energy level, or protect the top officials of these countries. Rigden, because the key word in this matter is politics. That is why this knowledge is not available to nations. By the way, do you know the origin of this special term sleeper? As they say, as you name a ship, so it will sail. The word sleeper was borrowed from the Norse mythology. The supreme god there was Odin. He was the god of wisdom and the father of witchcraft, magic spells, a connoisseur of runes and legends, a priest, a bearer of magical power. He had a shamanic intuition, knew magical arts, was cunning and insidious and was the ruler of people. He later acted as the patron of military alliances and as the sower of military discord. So, Odin possessed an 8-legged steed Sleipnir, the slipper. He could carry his owner with lightning speed from the world of gods, Asgard, to another dark world, the world of the dead, Nibelheim, the world of humans, Midgard, in other words, was able to slide between the worlds. It is on Sleipnir, according to legends, that Odin took part in the equestrian competition with the giant. Anastasia, well, nothing changes in the people's world, the same political and priestly competitions at the expense of power and people's necks are still going on. I pity those people who work for this priestly structure and squander their unique powers on nothing, on whims of the human mind enslaved by the animal mind. Rigdon, what can you do? People themselves make their choices. As they say in the East, wisdom never becomes perfect in one whose mind is not steadfast, who knows not the truth, and whose faith wavers. But let us get back to the topic of our conversation. The back essence is located at the back, at arm's length from the physical body. This is a kind of an observer of the present and a chronicler of the past. It is connected with the present and the past of the person, with the accumulated information, and not only during this life. For it, the past is a database of information, the present is the control and tracking of information, so to speak, in the real-time mode, that is, here and now. The back essence is a kind of a portal. It is an observer which is directly linked to the pineal gland, epiphysis. Thanks to this portal, after mastering certain meditative techniques, it is possible to carry out a tunneling to any point in the past. The back essence is usually depicted in the form of a fish, seal, for example, in the traditions of the northern peoples, lizard, elephant, turtle, it is denoted by the element of water, that which immerses into the depths of the past. The Siberian peoples have preserved mythological references about some kind of opposition of the bird and the mammoth, and it was the bird and the fish with the Sumerians. The back essence may also be depicted as a spirit with a human face symbolizing the human past. The right essence is located at an arm's length to the right of the physical body of a person. This is, in essence, one of the constituent parts of the animal nature in man. More precisely, the right essence has several qualitatively different functions, the manifestation of which depends on which is dominant in man, the spiritual nature or the animal nature. The right essence is closely related to this world. The main emotional characteristics of its manifestation in man, when dominated by the animal nature, are aggression, despondency, or fear. If it is not controlled by a person in a proper way, then he often becomes subject to its attacks. The latter is felt as a flow of bad thoughts or thoughts that provoke negative feelings and as a sudden surge of the state of depression. Its attacks are characterized by the narrowing of consciousness to the level of a certain problem as well as by such emotional states as despondency, anger, greed, resentment, self-blame, a manifestation of any fantasy or illusion, looping of thoughts on the same problem. But this happens when a person gives the power of his attention to these thoughts. I must point out that all four essences simply trigger the birth of certain thoughts which correspond to various surges of certain emotional states. But the essences keep alive and amplify, especially when the animal nature dominates, twisting a situation beyond recognition, making a mountain out of a molehill, only those thoughts that the personality chooses. Man has a choice, the thoughts of which essence to give preference and his attention to, simply put, whom to listen to. But as soon as he makes his choice, that is, as soon as he gives preference to certain thoughts, an active work of this or that essence, which has triggered these thoughts, begins. Anastasia, by the way, you once mentioned that the processes of so-called secret influence, mental manipulation, infection of the masses with ideas that stimulate aggression, anger, and negative emotions in people are associated with activating the right essence in people. Rigdon, that is so. The inhibition of the front essence in people and the activation of their lateral essences are carried out by specialists experienced in these things. Such influence is similar to hypnosis. In a meditation, one can feel and observe the influence of the right essence, understand where and how this flow goes. It is felt as a downward pressure from the right, from the outside to the inside. However, if a person disciplines this essence, that is, if he exercises strict control over his thoughts and emotions, avoids negative feelings, strictly adheres to the spiritual direction, he will get an effective helper that is well oriented in the world of subtle matter and has a multidimensional connection with the same essences of other people. And, I repeat, This connection happens regardless of time and space. In their sacred paintings, different peoples generally portrayed the right essence as some strong or aggressive totem animal, for example, the white tiger, the Kyrgyz shamans, bear, lion, leopard, monkey, and so on, or a mythical guardian, spirit. Mentions of this are recorded in archaic mythical and ritual traditions whenever aggression, fear, or unusual force is mentioned. They usually indicated fire as the element that symbolized this essence. The left essence is located at an arm's length to the left of the physical body. This essence is connected with the world of Ahriman, the world of the sacred knowledge of the material principle. It is endowed with a great number of features and functions. But again, their use by the personality depends on what is dominant in person, the spiritual or the animal nature. When the animal nature dominates, the left essence is characterized by guile, pride, deceit, and seduction. This is a clever and cunning essence which will present everything in the best possible light, its only aim being the distraction of a person from the main aim, from the spiritual path. If the personality does not control this essence in a proper way, it triggers doubts in a person and leads away from the spiritual path. While the right essence is associated with blunt aggression and anger, the left essence, on the other hand, can win with its logic, show the clarity of consciousness in building a logical chain from the animal nature. Just like the front essence, it pushes a person to search for something new, but in the material direction, suggesting that a person deserves more or that he is more significant than others. In general, the idea of megalomania and the thirst for secret power over others are the basis of its attacks on the personality when the animal nature dominates in consciousness. When such thoughts visit a person, then in the state of meditation one can also trace pressure from the outside, it will be felt as downward and pressing from the left side. If a person disciplines himself and his thoughts more often, steadily adhering to the spiritual path, then the left essence also becomes a personal assistant and a private informant on sacred matters. In ancient treatises, the left essence is commonly referred to or portrayed either as a terrifying beast or a clever and cunning animal, such as the wolf, jackal, a mythical monster, dragon, snake, or as a guardian and a spirit. As a rule, the indicated element is earth or, rather, the ashes as a symbol of temporal values in this world. Anastasia, I will clarify for the readers that the front essence and partially the back essence, in the mode of control and the tracking of information here and now, are active helpers in the spiritual self-development of a person. At the same time, the lateral essences, the left and the right ones, as well as the back essence, with its database of information about the past, perform more of the sleeper's functions working with other people's essences of the same name, and they also play a key role during the activation of the animal nature in man. Rigdon, that is right. The left essence, in particular, is the most informative one. It is the champion at retrieving information and manipulating the mood and desire of the object. When it is activated, it is difficult to resist it externally. However, it is also dangerous for the host of such activation as it can lead him astray as well. If we're talking about aggression, despondency, or suppression with fear, the right essence is responsible for that. But all of this works under the dominant of the animal nature of the observed object. So, if people do not want to be in the position of a rabbit in front of a boa, it is very important for them to learn to live on the spiritual wave, to live according to their conscience. Otherwise, as they say, when conscience is asleep, devils whisper. These essences are convenient for fulfilling specific goals and objectives in the invisible world. These essences are a kind of intelligent, living instruments of the invisible world which help a person in his spiritual development if, of course, he knows how to use and control them. If he does not exercise such control, which is, first of all, related to purity of his thoughts, then these lateral essences control him. In other words, they gain control over him through domination of animal nature. To learn how to control and handle one's lateral essences, to start with, it is necessary to learn to understand what they are and how they work. You must be able to track their manifestations in you, their maximum activation. The latter is usually manifested in the form of one and the same mental habits, psychological hooks of the personality that are based on a negative and selfish way of thinking. Under the domination of the animal nature, the lateral essences do not care what negative or flattering thoughts they can activate in the consciousness and what external images they can use for this purpose. That is why usually people blame everyone else for their mental troubles but never themselves. The most important thing for the lateral essences is the power of attention of the person himself, thanks to which they are increasing their influence over him. Figuratively speaking, they lull him into dependency on them. Most people do not know and do not understand how their essences function in daily life because of the material veil of the usual three-dimensional world. And this despite the fact that people are often faced with their manifestation. After all, when we think about other people, our acquaintances, friends, relatives, and so on, about people with whom we have had personal contact and, therefore, came in contact with their auras, then we are actually making contact directly with their essences. If we think in a spiritual vein, in a positive way, then our front essences correlate, and if we think in the material vein, in a negative way, then the corresponding lateral essences come in contact with each other. How does this happen? No sooner has a person had a thought, focused his thought on a certain person, then an information exchange at the level of subtle energies takes place between his and the corresponding essences of the person about whom he is thinking. For example, we just thought of someone whom we have not seen in 10 years, and he calls us literally immediately or visits us the same day. Or it can happen that sometimes, during a conversation, a person knows in advance exactly what the interlocutor is going to say. He feels his mood and the flow of thoughts before he says anything. What is the reason here? This is exactly a manifestation of interaction of essences. It is just that one of our essences has come into contact with the corresponding essence of another person. After all, for essences, neither time nor space exists in our understanding. They live by different laws. These are a kind of intermediaries of the personality in its connection with other worlds. It often happens that a person who does not particularly care about the purity of his thoughts, who is open to influence from the outside, is busy with his daily chores and all of a sudden, he gets angry or feels inexplicable fear for no reason. Actually, the reason for this lies in the exchange of information. This exchange can be of different kinds, including in the form of informational manifestations of subpersonalities about which we have already spoken, the interaction of the lateral essences of a person with the corresponding essences of people, and for other reasons as well. It may also be a manifestation of the will of the animal mind, for a reason which the person does not even suspect, through its system of activation of the animal nature in a particular individual or in many people regardless of where they are and whether they know each other or not. That is why it is important for any person walking the spiritual path to be aware of these manifestations, to be able to control his thoughts, and not to allow any interference of the animal mind's will, which is alien to him, in his life. Anastasia, in many cases, people do not understand or even suspect the existence of such mechanisms of influence from the invisible world, although they themselves suffer greatly from this in everyday life. Rigdon, yes, people may not be aware of it or know about it, but it is they who choose which thoughts to give preference to. And mechanisms of influence from the invisible world can vary greatly. If a person is in the state of domination of the animal nature, then it is quite easy to provoke him in such an invisible way as to trigger a negative surge in him, aggression and fear, in such an invisible way with the help of the lateral essences so that he opens up and got out of balance. In other words, to enter into resonance with him. And then, using his own energy, to directly influence his lateral essences which control him. By the way, the Kanduks, whom you mentioned in the book Izoismus, act in the same way. They trigger negative feelings in people and then they get control of their consciousness. This knowledge has also been used by priests in the ancient times, and the Archon priests of today use these techniques to their utmost as a tool of the invisible influence over people. But it is not only Archons who possess this knowledge. Some sleepers also use these techniques in their work. After all, this is just a tool. It all depends on who uses it, how, and for what purpose. Anastasia, please explain to the readers what happens to the front and back essences when the lateral essences are active like this. Rigden, in general, it can be said that when the lateral essences are actively working in a person under the dominance of the animal nature, which is visible by the manifestation of negative thoughts or emotional outbursts by a person in conversation with other people, the front and back essences are simply being exploited by the lateral essences for their needs instead of serving their true purpose, assistance in the spiritual self-development of a person. And the needs of the animal nature, just like of all matter, are one and the same and can be reduced to the struggle for domination. As a result, the back essence begins to actively rake through the moments in memory about different life situations where there was an activation of the struggle for influence, aggression, manipulation, focus on self-interest, and so on. And the front essence practically does not work for its intended purpose during this time, only occasionally activating a sense of hope for the future which is successfully twisted by the consciousness, thought templates and the material way of thinking of a person into the hope of a future well-being in the material world. But person himself is to blame in this situation because it is he who chooses which thoughts in his mind to give preference to. Anastasia, and if spiritual nature dominates in man? Rigden, then, everything happens in a qualitatively different way. The person is more focused on controlling his thoughts, on self-training, spiritual development, and self-perfection. The front essence works actively in him and, thanks to the discipline of thoughts, the lateral essences, let us put it this way, perform an additional function of some sort of sentinels. Then, even if aggressive, manipulative information, which the back essence reads, comes from outside, it does not bother the person because his front essence is activated. Mentally, he simply ignores this information. At the same time, the lateral essences which are controlled with the discipline of thoughts, besides taking part in the prevention of unwanted developments, in fact, help in cognition of the invisible world, thanks to their capabilities and interconnection with other dimensions. That is why it is important to be a real human and live by the positions of the spiritual nature. Anastasia, I know from my own experience and from that of our group that when people are faced with cognition of their essences in practice, different emotions may arise in them initially, from surprise to fear, from, so to speak, meeting themselves in the invisible world. Maybe this is just because of the habit from childhood to see ourselves from the perspective of three-dimensional space and because of the surprise of beholding yourself in an entirely different way and volume from the perspective of other dimensions. Rigden, this is natural. Since at the early stages of cognizing his essences, man has not yet overcome the habit fixed in his consciousness by his life experience in a three-dimensional world when any new phenomenon causes a mixture and struggle of two emotions in him, fear and extreme curiosity. Whichever wins in him is what the result of his cognition will be. This kind of fear is just a wrong choice, an emotion from the animal nature, into which a person invests the power of his attention, and thus, materializes it. One must have spiritual freedom in cognizing the world, that is, one must be liberated from such fears through firm choice, self-knowledge, and the pursuit of a higher spiritual world. The person who is more experienced in spiritual cognition does not fear the invisible world which is unfolding before him. He starts to simply use this knowledge, realizing that the essences observed by him are his own integral parts. In fact, it is himself in various manifestations of complex reality. Anastasia, yes, as they say, God does not give anything unnecessary. Rigden, quite right. The existence of these essences is related to human choice or rather, to creating conditions for it and to giving a certain degree of freedom to the personality. That's the point of all this multidimensional structure of man. Had the lateral essences not existed, there would be no freedom of choice between the desires of the material world and the spiritual aspirations, between good and evil. So a person, despite his existence in limited circumstances, imprisoned in matter, would still feel the soul and walk towards God by intuition. However, with these different essences he has an alternative choice, to choose anger, aggression, envy, pride, and infinite desires of matter, or not to give the power of his attention to all of this, to stand on the side of the spiritual, and desire one thing only, spiritual liberation and movement towards God. Spiritual development of man can be figuratively compared with the movement of a car with recurring slippages. At first, the human consciousness switches from one emotional state to another frequently and uncontrollably. This can be compared to an inexperienced driver who still confuses the acceleration pedal with brakes. The discipline of thoughts and control of his state of consciousness is exactly an attempt of a person to learn to control himself, his emotions, wishes and thoughts, while at the same time keeping a clear direction of his overall movement, his view of life and the main choice. That is, to live life consciously and with full responsibility, clearly focusing on the spiritual direction and continually keeping it in focus of his attention. Figuratively speaking, this is an intention to drive the car to the goal despite any small slips. Naturally, the more often you control yourself and the more attentive you are on your way, and not just stand gaping, paying attention to the thoughts and emotions of the lateral essences, the higher the speed of your movement, spiritual development, will be. Anastasia, this is a good example. If you think about it, indeed, the majority of people live their lives unconsciously in the spiritual sense, paying attention to the thoughts from their lateral essences. They set small everyday goals and material tasks before themselves, for example, to save, steal, buy, assert temporary importance in the family, at work, in the society, and so on. Figuratively speaking, they drive their cars in circles, uselessly burning their fuel, life energy. Rigden, it is just that they live their lives according to their own inner choice. In fact, they live limited, empty lives which the system of the archons has prepared for them, be a robot from morning till night with limited consciousness and a narrow range of interests and everyday worries. But these are all conventions which have been hyped in the world enough to make a human believe in them and work for this made-up system, which is one of the programs of the animal mind. In fact, it is a human who chains himself to this three-dimensional world because it is easier for him to be a slave in this system of material values than, with his spiritual labor, to earn true freedom as a personal pass into eternity. Man's life is in his own hands, in his right of choice, in his desire to perfect himself and work on himself. Anastasia, yes, especially since in our age of information technology, a variety of information becomes available to people about the spiritual heritage of different nations. Seek and you shall find. Rigden, the medieval scholar Omar Khayyam, as a man who possessed a wide range of knowledge in a variety of fields from physics and mathematics to philosophy and sacred knowledge, has the following lines. We are forced to suffer by the four, who make us eat and sleep therefore. But deprived of the whole, we go back to the start, to nothingness shall we return once more. Anastasia, Omar Khayyam knew of the four essences of man. Rigden, smiling, and how do you like this rubai of his? Born of the four elements, you listen to the word. From a secret world, where flattery's unheard. You are a beast, a man, an evil spirit and an angel, too. All that you seem hides together inside you. Or another verse by Omar Khayyam. When from the root of happiness, there grows eternal celebration branch. If, as tight clothes, life in the body has become for you, do not rely on corporeal, your traveling marquee indeed, for not so firm are those four ancient pegs with it. Anastasia, the eternal branch that grows from the root of happiness. Is this an allegorical comparison with the lotus flower in the solar plexus? The marquee points at the pyramidal structure. The four ancient pegs turn out to be the four essences. In addition, their primary mythological images are present here. The beast is the right essence, man is the back essence with the human past, the evil spirit is the left essence, and the angel is the front essence. It's amazing. Perhaps, Had I not known about the essences, I would have associated these words with material concepts. Turns out, people do not see even half of the knowledge that is reflected in the poems of Omar Khayyam. Rigdan, it is just that they do not bother themselves with the process of deeper learning needed to secure the key to knowledge. To continue the conversation about the human structure, as I have already said, cultural, mystical and religious traditions, myths, and legends of the peoples of the world have preserved many mentions of, for example, the main four essences of a human with the single center, the soul. Anastasia, I remember you once told us that ancient Egyptians had 5 elements which made up the human being, the Akh, the Ba, the Ka, the Kot, and the Ku. I recorded this knowledge in the book Sensei Part 4. It's amazing how people reacted to this information, but then, my reaction was quite similar in my time. It is as if people discovered something new for themselves. Despite the fact that records of the ancients about this have reached our times, many readers have not considered the concept of the soul precisely in such a context. The impression is that the knowledge exists, but the key to it was lost in time. And it is your explanations that gave people that valuable key to understanding not only themselves and what is going on in the world but also to the secret knowledge from ancient treasure chests of humanity. So, one can also understand people, what is offered to them today as an alternative knowledge about the soul, besides teachings of certain traditional religions, is mostly books of Western philosophy, where many things, as I now clearly understand, are written from the human mind. Rigdan, what can you do? People tend to complicate simple things. Anastasia, indeed. But even so, a person who has an overall understanding of what is being referred to, can easily sweep aside the husks of what was accumulated with time and understand the essence, of course, provided that he possesses primordial knowledge. It is just that society had lost the initial information. Hence, all the troubles. Your information largely explains the main essence of the primordial knowledge. I think that it will be more than simply interesting for modern people to learn about themselves, about their essences, about the soul, and the importance people attach to this information at all times. Rigdan, indeed, today this information is, unfortunately, complicated and disguised as external rites, rituals, appeals to the 4 elements, cardinal directions, mythical spirits, images of animal helpers which are related to man and in the characteristics of which one can see the knowledge about these essences of the human being. The sacred knowledge about the essences is concealed in the secret symbols of many ancient peoples of the North, Europe, Siberia, Asia, South, and North Americas, and Africa. It was known in more detail by the ones who kept one or another's people's sacred, spiritual knowledge and possessed the techniques of cognizing the invisible world, shamans, sorcerers, religious priests, and so on. For example, the shamanic mythology, the shamanism of North Asian peoples, including the Buryats, the Altai people, the Mongols, which is closely intertwined with ritual ceremonial practice, has preserved the following notions. For instance, viewing a shaman as a being of ambiguous nature, half man and half bird, or a creature in the likeness of an elk, bear, or a Manchurian wapiti. There are also mentions of the shaman's zoomorphic doubles, the main one of which is called Matzivara, that is, the mother of beasts. Anastasia, Matzivara. I wonder, where does this name come from? Rigdan, first of all, according to the mythology of the peoples of North Siberia, for example, the Evenks of the Stony Tunguska, the Ural, the Obi, and the Yenisei River basins, the universe is presented in the form of the feminine principle, the great mother of the world, the progenitress of all living creatures, the mistress of the universe, and the mother of animals. It was believed that white shamans, while making their astral journey to the higher heavenly world, passed the ways of all the worlds of the universe to get the fullness of their magical power, but they received its main part only from heavenly mistresses. Thus, they were endowed with the creating power from above, or, using our language, with the power of AllatRA which was given to them by the heavenly mistress of the world. Secondly, in the past, it was mostly women who possessed sacred knowledge of the invisible world because, by their nature, they feel the invisible world in a more subtle, intuitive way. The mystery of creation, of the birth of new life, is connected with a woman, with the feminine principle. In other words, in ancient times, the spiritual, sacral knowledge was kept and passed down to future generations mostly by shamancas and not by shamans. Later on, it is women who were considered to be stronger than men in mastering the shamanic practice of altering the state of consciousness. Scientists have already discovered a lot of ancient female burial places together with different cult objects, decorated crosses, mysterious symbols, ornamented amulets, and special ritual items. There are many known ancient stone drawings and sculptures of girls with flowing hair, the third eye in the forehead, and certain signs indicating sacred knowledge. Take even the 4,000 years old findings in Russia, for example, on the banks of the Yenisei, the Lena, the Angara in Siberia, or the pictograms of the cliffs of the ancient, the planet's deepest lake, Baikal. Thirdly, the human soul, which was linked to the higher worlds, was usually called the Mother's One. The peoples of the north, such as the Yakuts, for instance, have still preserved interesting mentions. In ancient times, their ancestors believed that in order for a person to live and think in a normal way, the following components of the soul could. Figure 7. Petroglyphs of the Altai Mountains. Kashyagaksky District, Altai Republic, Russia. Which were received at birth, should be present in him, the mother's soul, Ikut, life and psychic force, Sir, the earthly soul, Buurkut, and the air soul, Soljinkut. It is considered that after the death of a person, the mother's soul and psychic force, Sir, return to their creators, the earthly soul goes to the earth with the ashes, and the air soul dissolves in the air. At that, for the shamans, each of these souls receives special upbringing and a special incarnation. Anastasia, amazing. It's a pity that few people pay attention to the archaeological and ethnographic research of those peoples of the world that are small in number. Because as it turns out, they have preserved the same knowledge that can be found in today's hype religions and modern beliefs. You were just telling us about the peoples of the north of Russia, and I remembered that I came across some interesting information in research papers on this subject. For example, the Yakuts had a special attitude towards certain animals, the ritual worship of which is related to the idea of a dying and resurrecting beast. The latter was revered by the northern peoples in the form of either a bear or a whale. It was believed that God of knowledge, Bilchkin, lived in the seventh heaven. Furthermore, the Yakuts had the ritual of making a nest of the child's soul, that is, a special nest was built on a special tree with 8 trunks for the future soul of the child. Shamanic mythology had the motif of the world creation from an egg. There was a notion of the soul as a bird, about the human fate after death, about God's gift, Kutsur, which you mentioned and which determined the entire life journey of man, and also many other things from the knowledge which I'm already aware of, thanks to you. Most notably, they assigned an important role to the sign system in the form of special ornaments on the clothing, adornment, and magic items. They regarded it as secret knowledge, just like other peoples of the world. As for the 4 essences, as you've said, the Yakuts also had the notion of the shaman's spirit helpers. Rigden, well, not only the Yakuts but other peoples have mentions of this as well. In particular, that at shaman's disposal there are spirit helpers, which in those same ritual chants are called the force, the suite, the army. They often appear in the form of animals, fish, birds, or spirits which travel to another world for the purpose of performing some action. They negotiate with other spirits, enchant, and fight spirits of sickness. They prophesy, obtain the sought-after object, and so on. The knowledge about the 4 essences can also be found in symbolical schemes, for example, in elements of shamanic clothing, according to which, figuratively speaking, just like according to elements of military uniform, one can determine the shaman's rank, the level of his astral feats, and so forth. For example, In the foothills of the Urals, the most common composition patterns on the elements of ritual clothing and the sacred images of the Permian shamans are birds, the front essence, reptiles, the back essence, two mythical creatures of almost identical nature, the lateral essences, and shaman himself in the center. Moreover, on the lizard's body, they would sometimes draw 7 fish, emphasizing, among other things, the connection with the water element, dimensions, and also the memory of the acquired information. It should be noted that only adult people were depicted standing on the lizard, that is, ones who already had a past. 2 mythical creatures were usually drawn on each side of the shaman. In some cases, this was a direct indication of the right and the left essences by means of using traditional elements, meaning the animal nature, cloven hooves. Much later the lateral essences began to be depicted in the form of 2 animals or people with axes, knives, arrows, and weapons in their hands. In other cases, notations were directly opposite in function, of heavenly mistresses of the world who combined elements of a female body and a female elk, a revered sacred animal. Figure 8. Permian/Pecara Shaman's Plaque. It was believed that their power could transfer the shaman to other dimensions, including the higher ones. Sometimes the symbol of Allat, a crescent with horns pointing upwards, was placed on such images, believing that this way the shaman additionally increases his power. Later on, because of the desire to bring the lateral essences under their command, so to speak, for earthly purposes, these concepts began to be intermixed, which can be traced from images on various archaeological artifacts. Similar information about the 5 elements of the human being can also be found in other parts of the world. It is present in different religions and beliefs. Even in such syncretic, from the Greek word synkresis meaning union and synkretismos, joining, in this case meaning the union of different religions into a single system, religion as voodoo. This religion, thanks to mass media, has been hyped today around the world one-sidedly and in a negative way at that, so most people associate its representatives with black magicians and sorcerers. Voodoo appeared on the island of Haiti, located in the Caribbean Sea, which separates North and South Americas, among the population whose ancestors came from West African tribes and had been brought to the island by force as slaves. So, according to the sacral views of inhabitants of Haiti, the architecture of the human spiritual essence consists of 5 components, namely, the physical body. This is an echo of the knowledge about the right essence, the spirit of this body granted by the great serpent named Damballa. This is an interpreted echo of the knowledge about the left essence, a special channel which connects the human being with his star in the sky. This is an echo of the knowledge about the back essence, the big kind angel, meaning life force in their understanding. This is an echo of the knowledge about the front essence, and the little kind angel, the soul. This is an echo of the knowledge about human center. At that, these 2 angels are regarded as the most important parts of man, and it is about them that believers worry the most. Even the typical death is not as scary for these people as the prospect of, due to actions of black magicians, forever losing their soul, or turning into a wandering spirit, or becoming a weak-willed zombie which carries out a sorcerer's orders. After all, they believe that if a sorcerer succeeds at capturing the big kind angel, he deprives the person of life power and the person fades away. As for depriving of life power, this is, by the way, an echo of the former knowledge about actions of the Kanduk. In the Voodoo religion, there are also deity characters which are traditional for the African mythology, such as Legba. He personifies the East and the Sun and is considered to be an intermediary between the world of the mortal and the world of spirits, guardian of the gate to the underworld, thanks to whom communication between people and spirits takes place. One of his names is the Master of Crossroads. According to the Dahomey mythology, Legba is the 7th son of Maolisa, that very head of the pantheon of gods that I have already mentioned.